Okay, so this is I'm not going to say welcome to the last dispensation because this is also Jared. He and I are co-hosting together, right, Jared?
Yep.
And he was as happy as I wouldn't say schoolgirl, that's probably not good. But he was as happy as a kid in a candy store when I told him that Professor Emeritus, correct?
Yeah.
You do contribute occasionally to certain causes and things at BYU. But Professor Daniel C. Peterson, we are honored to have him on. We're thankful that he has graced us with his presence. He's like, stop it now. Okay.
I was excited. Just to explain my excitement, it's because I always used to watch the Interpreter Foundation when they were doing the scripture roundtables.
Yeah.
This is back like when we were doing the different books of scripture in I can't remember how long ago it was, but I watched all of them. All of them. They were so good.
Yeah.
And I loved all your commentary. So it is a
Yeah.
privilege to talk to you today.
Thanks. You know,
Yeah.
I've heard the expression happy as a clam, but I've never really understood it because I didn't know that clams were especially happy or that they show it. But anyway.
They weren't very happy in Alice in Wonderland, I'll tell you that. Okay, so Jared wanted maybe later on to talk some Islamic studies stuff. Right, Jared?
Yeah. I'm really interested in that right now. Yep.
Okay. And then we want to also, so we're going to have Paul Wuthrich, I think I'm saying his last name right, who played Joseph Smith. And if those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, we just sat down with our family a few nights ago and watched Witnesses. If you are what's the difference, Dan, between witness, and this is with the Interpreter Foundation, and I'm going to have all the links. Jared's going to have the links. We're going to I'm going to have images up and things like that, and where to go, to your website, everything like that. And you also have a YouTube channel,
Right,
which is amazing because you have a lot of very interesting interviews with scholars and with her last name is Bagley. I can't remember her full name.
Oh, Camry Bagley Fox, is that?
Yes, she does a really good job. Yeah, she played Emma. So what's the difference between this movie and because there is a difference between this movie and other Joseph Smith depictions of Joseph Smith in the First Vision and the translation?
This will be really self-serving, but I think one of the things that is different, unlike a lot of church videos, and I understand why they are the way they are, but they tend to portray things as all sweetness and light, or alternatively, you have the bad guys and they're really bad. And we've got some of those in our movie too. But we also show the human side, I think, of church leaders, including Joseph. It bothered some people because we had a couple of scenes where Joseph was upset. He lost his firstborn son, or when Martin Harris loses the manuscript pages. And he has a temper. We know that Joseph worried about his temper. I think when he says he fell into temptations, one of the things he worried about, at least Richard Bushman argues this, is that he had a temper. And he was a big, strong guy, and he could show it sometimes. And he had to, sort of wrestle that under control. And so there was one difference, I think, is simply that we show, as the director put it to me once, and I liked it, we show a prophet emerging. He's a young man. He's never seen how it's done. He has no models except in the Bible, to follow. Nobody around him is a prophet, and he has to learn how to do it. And he's very human, and he's worried. He's concerned sometimes. He's perplexed sometimes, and we showed that. So it's a more human side of Joseph Smith, I think, than many films have shown.
I noticed you did show that. That's one thing I picked up on, was that you didn't leave out his temperament, his personality traits. I always thought things that I've learned from other scholars that talk about Joseph Smith, his personality. You've talked about it plenty of times. I've watched every one of your talks at Fair Mormon or Fair Latter-day Saint now, where you speak about their personalities, and you didn't leave it out. He was a passionate man. He liked to wrestle. He was an outdoorsman kind of guy. Well, everybody was kind of outdoorsy, I guess, but today he would probably be bungee jumping, right?
Right.
He would be skiing. He would be the mountain climbing. And it's not that he wasn't intelligent, but he wasn't the scholarly type, right? He would be more of an extremist today.
Yeah, I think.
Okay, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I was just gonna say, and it must be pretty frustrating being the first prophet of this dispensation, because you're introducing all these like brand new concepts, and of course you're going to have opposition, both large and small, just probably incessant, people being like, what are you doing, what about this doesn't seem right? And so yeah, I think anyone would probably have a little bit of a temper, just because it's like you have to keep dealing with all these different questioning this and persecuting that and so on and so forth.
They had their images, and sometimes when new converts arrived at Kirtland and Nauvoo, they'd look at him and think, well, that's not what I expected, and his famous statement about a prophet being a prophet only when he's acting as such, I think, was said in response to some people who'd been offended because they saw him out playing ball with the boys, or something like that, and that's just not dignified. And so he said, look, I don't have to go around with my hands clasped in prayer all the time. Sometimes I'm just a guy who's still, well, he didn't say it this way, but physically vigorous, and I like to play a game, and I like to run and wrestle and jump and all those sorts of things. And if you don't think that's what a prophet should be like, well, I'm sorry, but that's what I am. So
yeah. And do you think that the church learned that more over time, or have the scholars in the early days like B.H. Roberts and others understood who Joseph was?
I think that we've gradually come to understand that prophets and apostles are human beings. Although even there, a friend of mine who was himself a general authority told me a story that really bothered me. About a member of the 12, and I don't know which one it was, but he found one weekend he didn't have an assignment. He didn't have to go anywhere. And his son was putting in a deck in his backyard. And he said, I haven't gotten out and pounded a nail or anything for a long, long time, and I'd love to do this with my son. So he goes out and they're working on this deck in the backyard, and they ran out of something. So this member of the 12 goes to a hardware store to buy whatever they needed. And a woman recognized him and rebuked him because he wasn't in a suit, white shirt, and tie. And my friend, who was a member of the 70s, said that the apostle was mortified and apologized to her. I'm sorry, sister, I don't want to offend you. Now, what astonishes me is the sheer chutzpah, the nerve of going up to a member of the 12 and rebuking him because he's not in a suit. I mean, who would do that? I would never do that. But the fact is, they have lives.
Right.
They weren't born in a black suit, white shirt, and tie. And they can occasionally be different.
Yeah. Did you have any questions, Jared? I have one.
Oh, not at this point. I'll ask later on.
So let's go to the movie for a second. Witnesses talks about, and I think one of the differences between this movie and others that like the church has put out and other independent film productions, whatever, we're talking about the three witnesses. So these depict not just Joseph Smith. We've got the story of Martin Harris, David Whitmer, Oliver Cowdery, and what they went through post witnessing of the angel and the plates, and even before.
Yeah.
Their doubts, their fears, their losing confidence in the prophet, they being disgruntled over all kinds of things, the authority that they felt like they should have had, the money issues that Martin Harris struggled with, not feeling important or having their power usurped or whatever, but you don't get into major detail on those things.
Right.
But what are the most important takeaways you think from the movie for Martin, David, and Oliver? What is one important truth that should be understood about each of them separately? That is, what is one takeaway for Martin, one takeaway for David and one takeaway for Oliver? I know that's a loaded question.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because one thing I was clear on from the beginning is I didn't want to demonize any of them. So, just we've had this notion sometimes they were faithful and then suddenly the devil took them over and they left and, just they turned bad or something. I wanted to help people understand why they left. So they might ask themselves, gee, if I'd been in those circumstances, how would I have reacted? I think, the fact that they left and still maintain their testimonies is remarkable. That strengthens the force of their testimonies to me a lot. But we wanted to show what happened with them. And for Oliver, I think there were some issues when Sidney Rigdon came into the church, and he was the best educated person in the church and an experienced church leader before he was a Latter-day Saint. And he assumed a really important place with Joseph Smith. And I think that some of Oliver, probably all three of them, Oliver, David, and Martin, felt a little bit shunted aside. Martin was disappointed because he never had a leadership position. Oliver and David did. Oliver, at one point in the film, he says, all I've been good for is to be stuck with the church's bills. But they've gotten high and holy callings, and I, what do I get? Nothing. I get to pay. Well, I think that looking at Martin's history, he probably was not cut out to be a high leader. Oliver and David probably a little more so. But in Martin's case, I think you see wounded ego. It's a little bit of that. In Oliver Cowdery's case, he's really upset about some developments. He is upset about money, the Kirtland Bank. Martin is too. He's upset about plural marriage, the first inklings of plural marriage. He just doesn't like it. And David Whitmer, I think David always liked the days of the church, or even before there was a church, when it was just a little cozy group. And when it starts getting bigger and there are different offices and it becomes more formal and structured and hierarchical, that irritates David. So David never comes back, but he and his brothers found a little sort of house church in Richmond, Missouri, which is more like what they remembered from 1829, 1830, 31. It's different, a little different issue for each of the three.
It's interesting.
Oh, go ahead, Jared.
It's interesting because a lot of those things that you just said, those are still the same issues today with a lot of members. Like as the church grows, it's not like what it looked like back in the 80s or the 90s. And sometimes that upsets some people as programs change or the church goes a different direction. In fact, like we've been talking about, I want to ask you a little bit about Islamic things. And one of the big things that I think is really good that's happened recently is the church's effort to help us understand Islam better by having the interfaith relations part of the website. And there was the new pamphlet that came out that was, I believe, first introduced by Elder Bednar and Elder Gong at BYU. So as the church changes, like that's just like, it seems like it's just kind of human nature. People like things to kind of stay the same. And then of course, all those other things like finances and people always scrutinizing the church, what it's doing with its money. So it should be pretty understand just to go back and bring it to them and be like, oh, well, they're like dealing with the same thing, but just at their own time, but at a much harder time because the church is brand new. So it's not like they had the benefit of like years of church history. It's like, it's all brand new. So I think that we can cut them a little bit of slack.
But by the time of Joseph Smith's death, the oldest members of the church have been in the church for 14 years, and most of them a lot less than that. And they come from Protestant backgrounds mostly, but they're just not used to, there is no set pattern of what we do and how we do things. And even the role of the president of the church isn't totally clear, and it's evolving, morphing over those years. Lots of things are changing. One thing that I meant to mention about the film that I think is a little bit unique, and there were some complaints about this. I had people come up to me and say, they're so young, they're too young. Well, my response was, do you know how old they actually were at the time this happened? The actors in the film are just about the right age. And if you're shocked by how young they are, well, then good. You should be shocked by how young they are. And so you realize Joseph is dead before he's 40. And when the church is established, he's about 25. Yeah, is he sort of fumbling his way along in some
Well,
cases when he doesn't get direct divine revelation? Sure he is. We all would be at 25. I am at much older than that.
I just
wasn't
recently turned, well, not recently, but this year I turned 39 and I realized, oh my gosh, like Joseph Smith,
Yeah.
most of his he was like younger than me. And it's hard to, I couldn't imagine doing that for one, being the age that I am.
Yeah.
But whether it's him and also with like Christ, because a lot of the paintings that we have kind of depict him kind of older, looking like 40s or 50s or something like that. But Christ was in his early 30s.
He died at about 33. So,
Yeah.
but what I found in a lot of films done by the church is that they will have, and by others, they will have a Joseph Smith that they cast for the older Joseph Smith, Nauvoo period Joseph Smith. But then they have him in the scenes with the origin of the church, and even almost the first vision. And so he looks older than he was. But we chose a Joseph Smith who was young. And I was happy to show it that way, that they understand how young he was and how new he was to all of this. And he had no models, he had no handbook, nothing like that to help
wasn't
him.
Martin Harris 23 years older
Yeah, he
than
was.
Joseph? Now, was the actor 23 years older?
About that, yeah. I can't
Wow.
remember
Well, he looked
exactly.
young for his age that played
Yeah.
Martin Harris.
Yeah, but he's about the right age. But the other two are really, really young, and so is Joseph. They're all young. And I remember even on the another story, I was talking to Jim Allen once, the former assistant church historian, who wrote a book about the mission of the 12 to England. And I said, well, what did you learn in writing this book? He said, well, I learned how young they were. And he said, I'd always known how young they were, but I didn't really know it. And when I realized they're over there basically inventing the church in England, and many of them were in their 20s. And you just think of your own
Interesting.
self to trying to do that kind of thing. It's amazing.
Do you think it's because we have the pictures of them being older? We have an older Martin Harris, we have an older David Whitmer,
Yeah.
and well, except for Oliver Cowdery,
Who died
and
young.
the actor was a spitting image
Oh,
of
he
Oliver
was.
Cowdery.
We couldn't have done any better than him. I mean, we now have what seems to be an authentic photograph of Oliver Cowdery, and it's stunning how much they look alike.
Wow,
So
that's amazing.
yeah,
I feel like all that kind of underscores the fact that this really is miraculous, that something like the church can be founded by young people, but it's through the Lord and his power. But like he works through simple means, and
yeah.
Well, and
I remember once being on my mission in Switzerland. I was with my companion way up in the mountains. We had this tremendous view north and south, and I realized we're the only missionaries in the whole area that I can see, and we're a couple of idiots, and yet the church survives. It's pretty amazing. And from the beginning, you look at this bunch, an unlikely bunch, not well educated, not really sophisticated, out on the frontier, and it worked.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Jared brought up a good point about we learn. I don't think these things were coincidences, the mishaps and the struggles that they had. Like you said, Oliver and Martin liked the younger church when they were translating, when they were receiving, when Oliver and Joseph received the priesthood. And they kind of reminisced about that. Well, but the church was growing, and the Lord's like, there's other people that I want involved. I have, and Joseph knew that, and he couldn't really explain that to them, that look, the Lord's going to call many people to many different positions. This isn't just our little church by the side of the road,
Yeah,
and
when they organized the church, it's one of those early meetings, and Joseph addresses the group there, and they all fill, one cabin, and he says, know more about the future of this work than a babe sitting upon its mother's lap. It will fill North and South America. It'll fill the world, but you can't do that if you continue to be a house church.
Right.
David Whitmer's vision would never have worked.
Why do you think David Whitmer never came back?
I think that, and I don't mean to denigrate him at all. I think David Whitmer was sort of pig-headed. He was I think he was a bit of a curmudgeon. I think the film actually shows that fairly well. You know,
So you can see an angel and still be pig-headed, right?
Yep, you can. And the angel doesn't transform your personality. You don't get a personality transplant. But that makes him actually a very good witness, because you can trust him. When he feels strongly about something, he will say what he's thinking. On the matter of his witness of the plates and so on, he absolutely never deviates. That he saw the angel, he heard the voice of God, that sort of thing. And so I think this is a man of remarkable integrity. I hope, I trust that he'll be okay in the eternities. But I think he was a kind of a, well, if you look up the word curmudgeon, there he is. You know, his picture is there. And you see that in the film when the reporter wants to talk to him, he basically tells him, go away. Not interested in talking with you. Apparently, he was pestered multiple times each day for decades by people who usually wanted to come by and mock. He was just sick of it. But once you got him going, oh yeah, he would tell you the story, and he never deviated from what he'd seen, what he'd heard. But I think he was a proud man. I don't mean that necessarily in a really bad way, but he stuck by what he believed. He had strong opinions, and he did not back down for anybody, which makes him a credible witness.
Yeah. I wanted Jared to have some time with you.
Mm-hmm.
I want to ask a few more questions about the movie, and the book. And then if you want to, we could get into whatever you wanted to, Jared.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because that's important.
Yeah.
Also.
And I want to mention too that we're about to launch work on a new movie, so I'd like to talk about that a little bit.
Yes. You want to actually, you know what? I've got one more question, and then let's talk about the new movie, and then I'm going to let Jared just take her away.
Yeah.
In the movie, we've got the partition, okay, between Oliver and, was it Oliver or was it Martin?
Martin.
You're showing the blanket. Now, I remember one time I think you were at the Joseph Smith Memorial Building, and you had just published a book, I think, and you were talking, you had your black leather jacket on. You remember that?
Yeah.
That was a good Q&A. That very, I'll leave the link to that too. But you talked about that there was no partition, but there was one in the doorway of the cabin that they were translating. Do you want to explain that?
Yeah, their main concern was not to shield the plates. The evidence seems to suggest that Joseph didn't even have the plates with him necessarily when he was translating. They were nearby, but he didn't need them right there. He wasn't, as the images we have show him, with his index finger going along each line of the text. He couldn't read it that way. He wasn't equipped to do it that way. He was getting it by revelation. It was coming from the plates, but by revelation. So what he needed was the instruments, the translation instruments, the Urim and Thummim, the seer stone. And the plates were nearby, under cover, or in an adjacent room or something like that. He rarely had them there. But what they didn't want was people were coming by to gawk at them while Joseph was dictating and Martin or Oliver was taking the dictation. And so they put up a curtain so that people wouldn't be coming by and just staring at them. They wanted some privacy. And in these little tiny cabins, that was hard to arrange. So that sheet or curtain was a useful thing. But it wasn't to hide the plates from the scribe. It was to hide them, apparently, to hide the two of them, or not hide them, but give
the
them
sacredness of it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So let's talk about this movie real quick.
Yeah.
Or not real quick, but however long you want to talk.
Well, we did the movie Witnesses, which is a theatrical film, and then there's an accompanying docudrama that actually is what we first set out to do. It's called Undaunted: Witnesses of the Book of Mormon. And that's where we have the talking heads come on and talk about things. And we also expand the coverage a bit to the 8 witnesses and what I call the informal or unofficial witnesses, like Lucy Mack Smith or Emma Smith, various people like that, that also saw the plates or saw the Urim and Thummim. There are actually a surprising number of them, including a number of women. Mary Whitmer is the most notable one, who's really ticked off at them. And we actually tell this story in Undaunted and show it. She's about to throw them off her property because she's doing all the work to entertain all the guests, milking the cows and cooking the meals. She's sick of them.
Yeah.
And she's out in the barn, and an old gentleman appears with a knapsack who says, "You're under a lot of stress. It's fitting that you should have a view of the plates." And he takes the plates out of the knapsack and lets her hold them and leaf through them. And she may have had that experience before any of the official witnesses. I think that's likely, that in the chronology, this is before the 3 witnesses or the 8. So she's the first person outside of the Smith family who has any real contact with the plates. And they say that she never had any complaints after that, But we did the theatrical film, then the documentary, and then a bunch of short features that are up on the Interpreter website for free. It's called Insights videos with questions and answers, things that arise when people are thinking about the witnesses. And we've now decided to do the same thing with regard to another issue. And we're calling it 6 Days in August. And it's about the 6 days in August when you have a confrontation, 1844, between Sidney Rigdon and the 12 over who should lead the church. And the answer to that question is a really important one. Joseph Smith has just been killed at the end of June, and a little more than a month later, now you have this issue: who, if anybody, will lead the church? So we're planning to do a theatrical film on that, and then with a docudrama. And I've already done 2 interviews with leading historians, Tom Alexander and Jim Allen. Both, well, Jim's a former assistant church historian, and Tom is retired from BYU. They both are. And we're going to talk about that. It's a very dramatic story set there in Nauvoo. Who will lead the church? Who had the right to succeed? This is becoming a more important issue than I once thought, because I'm hearing people out there who clearly don't like Brigham Young, and they kind of want to get rid of him. So I've had people, including active members, come up to me and say, I've decided that Brigham Young wasn't the Lord's choice. It was kind of an apostolic coup. Yeah, and I want to say to them, have you thought about what you're saying? Because if you cut off the line of authority there, then every apostle, every prophet, every temple, every ordinance since then is invalid, not divinely approved. Think about this. So we want to make the case that, especially in the documentary, that the 12 were trained, prepared to take over their role, and that they were the Lord's choice. So, and Paul Twitch will be back in that, by the way, playing Joseph Smith in some flashback scenes and so on.
Yeah,
and we'll have some of the same actors back for this one. But we just Saturday night, I was looking at some footage for tryouts, and I think we've settled on our Brigham Young. And I'm really pleased. I think he's going to be great.
Awesome. And you said line of authority. I no pun intended. I said lion, a lion of authority.
The lion of the Lord. Yeah.
Yeah. Jared and I are going to interview Paul. I think it's on the 15th. And very humble guy. He's
a great guy.
Perfect guy to play Joseph.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting because I think it was earlier this year I interviewed Linda L. Booth. She was the former president of the Council of the 12 Apostles in the Community of Christ. Mm-hmm. And I got to kind of witness firsthand. I knew a little bit about the RLDS, how they turned to the Community of Christ, and was familiar with a little bit of their beliefs, but not as much as when I talked to her. And I've seen the end of the line of that branch and what they are now. And it's quite different, substantially different from even what they were before becoming the Community of Christ, let alone compared to our own church. So
yeah. When I hear people say, well, the 12 probably weren't the right choice, Brigham Young wasn't the right choices. Well, you do realize that the church today would be completely different if Sidney Rigdon had assumed control of it, or if we'd gone the way of the RLDS church, now the Community of Christ. I mean, would we have temple ordinances, eternal marriage? No, probably not. There's so many things that we take for granted. And what they want sometimes, I think, is the good parts version. They want all that stuff, just not Brigham Young. Well, sorry, you don't get that choice. It's a whole package.
Yeah.
Brigham Young was always the one to defend the prophet when people were uprising against him.
He was, absolutely devoted to Joseph Smith.
Yeah.
I guess it makes sense that Brigham Young would be attacked because we all know that, like, for example, the primary focus of the attacks of the adversary would be the Book of Mormon and Joseph Smith, because it all stands on them. But Brigham Young would be like the next one in line after that. So it makes sense that there'd be a focus on that.
Yeah, I mean, you can say, okay, I believe in Joseph Smith, he was a prophet, but then who succeeds him? Which group should I go with? And that's an almost equally momentous question. So is the church, the true church, still out there? Or is it one of these splinter groups, or is it the one based in Salt Lake City?
Yeah.
You know, and that's a good segue, because so as we talk about how the church has been, how it's changed over time, any given decade, it's going to look different from what it did the decade before. As we move forward and we're starting to become a more global church, I wanted to ask you, what are your thoughts about, you know, this pamphlet that came out? I don't know, did you have anything to do with it, or what is your thought about the interfaith section of the church website? And as of right now, it seems like it only has content relating to Islam, but that's why I want to ask you and see what you think.
Yeah, I know that's a major concern among some of the brethren. They're very worried. I've heard some of them say they're worried about the rise of this anti-Islamic sentiment among certain people in the United States and elsewhere. I mean, obviously, we don't approve of terrorism and that kind of thing, but that's not all there is to the world of Islam. And not every Muslim, not even very many of them, relatively, are terrorists or even sympathetic to it. So the church is worried about that. I've had conversations with some of the brethren about that. They even had a group of us come in. I think I can say this now. This is a long time ago. I've not made public mention of it before, I don't think, but I was invited to go up with a couple of other people at one point to speak to, it was going to be the area authority of the church, and it ended up being the Quorum of the 12 Apostles. And then they called a couple of nights before and wanted to know, well, would I be all right with the first presidency dropping in? And I thought, are you kidding? What am I going to say? No, they can't come.
I got to watch Hee Haw.
Yeah. So we ended up speaking to them. It was interesting. There were three of us who did the presentation. A fellow by the name of Jim Toronto, who is now the president of the Roman Temple, but he was a professor of Arabic at BYU with me. And then the other one was a man by the name of Garrett Gong, who's since gone on to do other things. But the three of us made that presentation to the 12 in the first presidency, and it was a very interesting experience, and they were asking really acute questions. I know they're deeply interested in this. An example of that is that I did an article for the Ensign back in, I know it was the April issue. I can't remember what year, 2018, thereabouts. And it was I was told it was a first presidency request. I later had that confirmed. And they actually took out someone else's article. I don't know who it was or what it was, because they wanted that in. And I could only write it. It could only be so long because there was only so much space available. When I asked for another, I think 200 words, they said, nope, can't do it. It has to fit in this slot. We can't expand it. But it was an article on Islam, just basic stuff. It was not elaborate or advanced or anything like that, but trying to give people a basic idea, but to put it in the church magazine so that people would know, that the church is friendly to them. Now, I should tell you, I got hate mail by the bushel for that. And I remember one woman had a series of emails. She wanted to know how I managed to sneak that article into the Ensign. I said, well, I didn't sneak it. It was requested. She said, requested by whom? And I said, well, it was requested by the people who just presided over General Conference. And she said, who's that? So I think you can figure this out. I mean, I'm trying not to drop names here, but one wrote to tell me that when she and her husband saw that was in the Ensign, they took their copy out and burned it in the backyard, and this stuff. I even got a call from a general authority. President Oakes had asked him to call me to see how I was doing, with all the hate mail that was coming in, because they were getting some of it too.
That is really sad, because like I've talked about on my channel a lot how I think as time goes by, Islam is going to become more and more relevant, especially when we move into the millennium. I don't know how things are going to change then specifically, but I'm sure that missionary work is probably going to be able to go to places that maybe it hasn't before.
Yeah.
But in the meantime, you have a lot of people immigrating from the Middle East to Western countries to the United States. When I go to Wichita, because I lived, here by Wichita, and I go to Costco or somewhere like that, I see Muslims, and they're in a place where they could potentially, talk to people, learn about the church. And so I feel like if we have this attitude that they're other, or that they're, the enemy, we side only with the Jews or something like that, I think that we're really robbing them and ourselves of very important experiences. And so I was wondering, do you think that's maybe one of the big reasons why the church is wanting to
Yes.
do this?
Yeah, they know that that a lot of Muslims are coming to the States, and that many of us are going to have contact with them as fellow workers, neighbors, workers in the PTA, whatever it happens to be. And they want us to understand and to be friendly toward them. And that's a really important concern for them. Now, when I went up and did that presentation on Islam, or the article that I wrote for the Ensign, have they done the same thing on Buddhism? I don't think I've seen an article like that in the church magazines on Buddhism or Hinduism or so on. I don't know for sure, but I don't think that there's been a similar presentation to the Quorum of the 12 in the First Presidency on Buddhism or Hinduism or something. It's not that they don't respect those religions, but they feel a special concern about our relations with the Muslim world. And now we're going to have a temple built over there.
Mm-hmm.
Is that in Dubai?
Yeah, that's pretty astonishing.
Yeah.
And it was by invitation. They wanted it. And when we said, well, we can build a chapel, they said, no, we understand you have a higher level of building, a temple. We want one of those built here. And it's not like we have a huge number of people living right in that immediate area, but actually we have a lot of people who live around the Middle East and so on, for whom this will be an important place to go. And they're wanting to send a message in Dubai of religious tolerance. And this is a really good way to send it.
It's so fascinating. I know that on the other hand, there are a lot of people that do feel a kinship with Muslims, because they understand that they're descended through Abraham and Ishmael. And so they have they also have special promises that would fall under the family of Abraham. And I wonder why, if maybe just they're kind of like on deck. If you thought about it like this, that this part of this last dispensation, a lot of it's mostly probably gone among Christians, or had most success among Christians. But I wonder if like a next group may be Islam, because they're of that bloodline, and maybe they listen to it more than maybe others, like to begin with anyway.
Yeah, and one of the points I've always tried to make when I've spoken to Latter-day Saint groups or written for them is that we're not as far apart as you may think. I mean, even the word Allah is related to our word Elohim. Mm-hmm. You ask them, so what do you believe about the creation of the world? Well, God created the world in 6 days. He rested on the seventh. He placed Adam and Eve in the garden. Thereafter he called prophets like Moses and so on, right down to Christ. They accept Christ as the greatest, one of the greatest of the prophets. And we have so much in common in terms of the way we understand sacred history and so on, that we're really cousin religions. And I found that a lot of Muslims feel very comfortable with Latter-day Saints. They send their children to BYU because, well, I'll give you a very specific instance. We had a fellow come through years ago who was the ambassador of Jordan to the United States. He spoke at BYU and fell in love with the place. And he went back to Jordan. And he said, look, a lot of us received some of our education in the United States, but universities are different now. Promiscuity and binge drinking and all that sort of thing. We don't want to send our kids to universities where we'll lose them, but we'd love them to have a U.S. education. And he said, I've found the place, this is where you can send your kids and they will be safe. They'll be in a good moral environment and so on. And so he was so serious about this. I thought maybe he was just flattering us when he was talking that way. I got a call once from a friend of mine who was at Princeton, and the same fellow had come through and spoken there. And he said, he took the first 5 or 10 minutes of his talk to praise BYU. What have you guys done to him? But he really was smitten with it. And so at one point, I went to a meeting in Amman, Jordan, and people sitting around the table were almost all of them either current cabinet ministers in the Jordanian government or past cabinet ministers at that level. And all of them had kids they either had sent to BYU or they wanted to send to BYU. And I thought that's astonishing. It's a little awkward. What if they convert? We don't know. They haven't tended to do that. But at the very least, they go back to the Middle East and they are friends. And they love the university. They love Latter-day Saints. And that doesn't hurt us.
Well, I noticed that things have changed socially even than they were 20 years ago. You had this, like you said, some animosity because of not understanding Islam. Mm-hmm. We've kind of come out of that, and even some of the social things were, in other words, it's modernism and secularism that is our enemy now. It's That's not right. Ideological, and you know what I mean? Enemies anymore.
Yeah.
It's secularism and those who believe in God now.
Yeah.
And I noticed that they like that we're teaming up with them on a lot of issues.
There's a metaphor from Martin Luther, who didn't always live up to his own advice as far as getting along with people who had different religious beliefs. But he said, look, we're all like we're watchmen on the walls of a city, and the enemy is outside coming toward us. And he said, we should be shouting encouragement to one another, because I can't stand where you stand and you can't stand where I stand. We each have our section of the wall that we have to defend. But the real enemy isn't each other. I would add, we shouldn't be shooting arrows into each other's backs because the real bad guys are outside. They're the ones coming who want to tear down the whole structure of belief in God and objective morality and all that sort of thing. And so, obviously we would love everybody in the world to become a Latter-day Saint, but barring that, I want Catholics to be the very best Catholics they can be. I want Muslims to be really faithful Muslims. And I want to encourage them and help them if I can.
Yeah. And they make a pretty sizable percentage of the human population on Earth. They if I remember right, I think it's about like 24% of the world population is Muslim. That's almost 1 in 4. So it's a really, really important group. So yeah. Now that temple in Dubai, it's because, and I guess I don't quite understand. I've been trying to figure out the United Arab Emirates. I know that they have a lot of immigrants. I saw something to the effect that like 80% of the country are from other parts of the world, whether it be India or the United States or just all over. Do you know anything about that, or why that country compared to other Arab or Islamic countries? What happened there? Do you know?
Basically, a bunch of little Bedouin tribes who suddenly found themselves sitting on oil and became phenomenally wealthy. And so a country began to grow up, but they don't have enough manpower to do all the work that needs to be done. So they bring in imported workers. A lot of Filipinos, Americans, Europeans live there. And so one of the reasons they're interested in having religious sanctuaries for different groups is they've got those people in their population. And one of the highest priorities in traditional Arab culture is hospitality. You treat your guest with enormous respect. And so if people need places to worship, they're wanting to say, we will provide those. I mean, the land where the temple is going to be built is provided by the government. They've done that for us before. They gave land for a stake center there. They want to make sure that the people who come and stay with them are happy and feel welcome. So that is why it's going on there, or going in there. And the United Arab Emirates are kind of a weird thing. It's really kind of a conglomeration of separate little mini states. but phenomenally wealthy, and that allows them to do some interesting things.
I know it would be
they're definitely trying to show a message to the world, but also I think to their fellow Arabs, that being Muslim is compatible with being religiously tolerant and open.
Along those lines, I mean, I guess this kind of gets into speculation, but do you feel like this could be significant as far as like part of the Lord's plan? Like, do you think that this happening there could be a precursor to, I don't know, more LDS presence possibly, or other religions' presence in the region?
There certainly could be. I mean, at the edges of the Islamic world, we already have areas where we have missionaries and so on, Indonesia and places like that. Don't have any in the Arab world. Well, I take that back. We've got service couples and so on who've worked in places like Iraq and Jordan and Lebanon. On the whole, they have not cared up till now if we convert Christians, because to them, a Christian is a Christian. Doesn't matter if you want to switch from being a Methodist to being a Catholic, they don't care. Just want to switch to be a Latter-day Saint, that's fine. They've been leery of proselytizing from Islam. Leery is putting it mildly, from Islam to Christianity. But I think one of the most interesting experiments right now is that a lot of Muslims are growing up in places where those policies aren't in place. That is, in Australia, the United States, Canada, Great Britain, New Zealand. You can convert to anything. The government doesn't intervene. It doesn't say you can't proselytize, you can't do that. So you've got a large population of Muslims who are growing up in the tolerant, non-traditionally Muslim West. And that's going to have an impact. I think the future of Islam maybe is being written outside of the Arab world, but it will have its impact when those people, many of them getting graduate degrees at Harvard or the London School of Economics or something, go back, they will have been changed a little bit by what they've seen. And that's more and more the case. So
it's so interesting. It's a very interesting time to be alive, to see all these things happening, and can't wait to see what's next. No, this is more of a doctrinal thing, and I don't know if you have an answer or if anybody has an answer for this, but when, like, if you have a Muslim that decides to join the church, we have when you get a patriarchal blessing, you can be you're usually adopted, or your lineage is declared through one of the 12 tribes.
mm-hmm.
But I know that there are patriarchal blessings out there that your lineage is only declared through Abraham, and I've never had an explanation why that is. But I'm wondering, do you know if like Muslims, like if they would ever just be declared through Abraham, or do you have any sense of the church's stance on that?
The only person I know, and it's someone I know really well, who got a blessing only from Abraham, not a specific one. We actually went and questioned the patriarch and asked, and he looked at it and he was surprised. He said, that is interesting, isn't it? It's kind of interesting, because he didn't say, oh, that was my idea or something. It was, that is interesting. Like, he was discovering it for the first time. And he said, well, I take it he gets the blessings of all of the children of Abraham. Well, that's not bad. But the only Muslim whose lineage I know, it hasn't come up mostly in my conversations with people, but I know one Palestinian Arab who was given the lineage of Judah, which was quite a shock to her. But actually, it actually makes sense. I don't always think that those lineages mean literal genealogy or assigned to a tribe in some cases, and your blessings will come through that tribe. But in some cases, it probably does mean literal lineage. And for a Palestinian, that's very likely true, because, a lot of them, I think, are just the local population, various conquests washed over them. They might be as Jewish as the people coming in from the Bronx, or maybe more so.
Yeah.
Well, there were lots of wars between the Arabs and the Jews throughout in antiquity, right? I mean, so who knows? There might be blood of Judaism in in some Islamic areas because of, like you said, because of conquering and
and the population just stayed there, and so they became, they were Hebrews, and then they became Christians, then they became Muslims, and but they're the same people, descendants of the original people there. And I'll give you an example. I mean, sometimes going down the street in Jerusalem, I cannot tell if they're not in traditional garb, Jewish garb or traditional Muslim garb. It's hard to tell which one is which. And I'm told that genetically, they're very difficult to distinguish in a lot of cases. The most embarrassing example of that for me was we once stayed in a hotel in Nazareth that was co-owned, I think, by Jewish and Palestinian interests. And the workers in the hotel were both Jewish and Palestinian. Nazareth is a kind of mixed city, mostly Arab, but a lot of Jews. And I walked up to the desk one day, and there was a woman, I think, behind the desk, and I said, "Shalom," and she said, "Salam." She was not Jewish; she was Arab. So the next time I come walking out, I said "Salam" to the guy behind the desk, and he said, "Shalom." I said, "Okay, I give up. I give up." I mean, I've been around this area a lot, and I can't tell the difference, so I'm just going to say hello, because either one of them sort of, I misidentified people.
Well, isn't it interesting that the word sounds the same?
Yeah.
There could be some etymology.
Well, there definitely
there,
is. They both mean peace, just one in Arabic and one in Hebrew. And languages are closely related, sort of like, I would say, Portuguese and Spanish, maybe not quite that close, but something like that.
Yeah, they're both Semitic languages, right? So,
well, like you said, Allah and Elohim,
are
very similar too.
And you teach Arabic, right? So you
I
speak
did.
Arabic?
I've now retired from BYU, but yes,
Okay.
I do speak Arabic.
Wow, I've flirted with the idea of doing that. I'm working on Hebrew right now, but as I've looked at Arabic, I know that there's the different types, and it seems like the larger, more popular form or dialect, I'm not sure what you would call it, would be Egyptian. Is that right?
It's the language of movies and most pop songs and things like that. So everybody in the Arab world can understand Egyptian colloquial Arabic. On the other hand, if you're speaking Moroccan or Iraqi or something like that, that may not take you quite as far.
I see.
And then there's a standard language that they write and that they use on formal broadcasts and things like that. And everyone who's educated learns that. But it's an acquired language. It's not what they speak at home. So Arabic was just on the eve, I think, of splitting into separate languages. Didn't quite get there, the way Latin split into Spanish and Romanian and Italian and French and Portuguese and so on. Arabic would have gotten there in another 100, 200 years, but printing showed up just in time, and now the broadcast media has probably sort of slowed that down, if not stopped it.
I don't know how much that the Arabic that we have Arabic Books of Mormon.
Yes,
but we don't have it for Hebrew. Do you know why that is?
Yeah, it's a political thing. When the Jerusalem Center was being built, there was real fear that it would be a missionary center. And I think some Latter-day Saints kind of were hoping it would be. We had to make all sorts of promises about not proselytizing in Israel. And so even the publication of a Hebrew translation of the Book of Mormon, which did exist, but it was kind of suppressed, that's been put on hold. And we signed agreements that we would not try to convert people there. And so it's the one place in the world that I know of where the students come over, we tell them, you may not be an active missionary here in Israel. Every member, not a missionary here. And if you do, and if you keep doing it, we'll send you home. And it's awkward. There was a point where Howard W. Hunter was asked to sign a pledge that we would never proselytize in Jerusalem or in Israel. And he wouldn't sign it. He said, I will sign a pledge that we won't do it as long as it's against the rules, as long as it's against the law. But to pledge that we'll never do it, no, I won't bind the church to that. And they let him by. So we got the building.
Wow, I didn't know that. I didn't know that. That's interesting.
How much time do you have, Dan?
I can go on.
Well, before you leave, I wanted to segue back to, if I could, just a few more things about witnesses. But if you still have some questions, Jared, by all means.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Oh, right now? Oh,
yeah. No, I'm just saying I didn't want to just drastically change the subject back to
just that's really interesting. I didn't know that was tied specifically to the BYU Jerusalem Center and all that.
Yeah, it became a real issue. There are people, I remember hearing a rabbi say that there is no difference between gassing a Jew and converting a Jew. Now that seems really extreme to me, but that's a very common attitude in Israel. They feel beleaguered that their numbers, they lost millions of people within the last century, and that if Judaism is to survive, then they can't allow missionaries to proselytize there. So we made a promise that we would not try to convert people, and we've kept it. And now
I even do that myself, because I talk, sometimes I have guest speakers from Israel. On a regular basis, I speak to this rabbi. His name is Gedalia Gerfein. And even though I'm not in Israel, I'm aware of that proselyting agreement. And so I never like share beliefs or anything. I just ask him questions in an effort to know more about Judaism. But
now I'll tell you a story, kind of an amusing story. When I was over there teaching at the center, we had Robert and Charlotte Kundick, who were, he was the former associate tabernacle organist and so on. When he retired, he was sent over to be the organist at the Jerusalem Center. And he organized concerts and so on there, made the center really it's a major factor in the community. People come usually Sunday nights. Sunday is not our Sabbath there. So we had the concerts on Sunday nights, sometimes other nights. And then he became the principal organist at the Lutheran Church of the Redeemer right downtown in the old city of Jerusalem, and really established a presence for us there. But at one point when he was about to go home with his wife, they put on a special concert there. All sorts of people came to honor him. And it was a who's who of Israeli society, members of the parliament and the former ambassador to France and on and on. And there were two couples. Bob Kundick caught me and said, Dan, I don't have any time before the concert. Can you take these people on a tour of the Jerusalem Center? And I said, sure. They were very well dressed and distinguished looking. And finally, toward the end, one of them said, well, let me introduce myself. I'm Dr. So-and-so. I'm the president of your neighbor here at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. And this is my good friend so-and-so, the Dr. So-and-so, the president of the University of Tel Aviv, two biggest, most prestigious universities in the country. And he said, now we have some questions about your church, your religion. And I said, I can't answer them. And he said, well, yeah, we know about all that nonsense, but come on, we're academics and it's private. Just, we have a few questions. I said, I can't. You can look us up in those days in an encyclopedia, something like that, but I can't answer your questions. And then the Hebrew University president said, but that's ridiculous. I said, yeah, I think it is too. And he said, this is a free country. We can talk about anything we want. I said, I can't. And he said, that needs to be changed. And I said, well, you change it. We can't. But if you want a campaign to change it. And there was actually a time when there was a very famous scholar of history of religions at the Hebrew U, and he heard that I was there. And he wanted me to come over and lecture to his class on Mormonism, as we called it, as we used to call it. And I was willing, but the committee that oversaw our relations with the community said, no, you can't do it. I said, not even in a class in which they're going to be talking about the subject. And I would be, an actual believer, a native informant, and the professor wants me there. And they said, no, not even there. Can't do it.
That's interesting, because you've always heard that. I always thought that you were allowed to talk to them about it if they asked you. But that's not true.
It's kind of
Apparently.
true. It's really awkward, and they didn't want it that institutional, to have me in a class lecturing to a group on the church. They decided that's too close to the line. No. So I thought it was really unfortunate. And frankly, I think it is a bit stupid. I mean, Israel is a really free country, and it has some of the best academics, the best professors. I mean, it's stereotyping, but it's a nation of Jews. They're really bright, and they've got really good universities. And the idea that there's a topic that you can't talk about there is just silly. They can talk about almost anything else. So
yeah. Well, either way, I know that probably speaks really well of us, that they know that we care that much to respect their wishes, or at least the wishes of the Orthodox, the Haredim, the Hasidim, and all that.
Yeah.
So, because like how we act and what we do, I think that really shows who we really are.
I think it's sent a really good message that we are good citizens, and I think that frankly that's going to help us. Probably has helped us in the Islamic world too. If we give a pledge, if we give our word that we won't be sneaky trying to convert your people, then they'll believe us because we've shown that. We will obey the law. We're zealous missionaries, no question about it. But if we give a pledge to not misbehave or violate their rules, and we keep it, that in the long run, that's a good thing for us.
Yeah. Another quick thing. Sorry, I could probably go on forever, but I was reading this was an older article, I think in the Deseret News, and I think it was Victor L. Ludlow that was talking about the BYU Jerusalem Center and saying that it's one of the top places to go if you want to meet a general authority.
That's true.
Is that true? Like when they go there, I put together I don't know if you've ever seen my channel, but I have all these different spreadsheets where I keep track of different things. And I wanted to do one where I could find each time that it was publicized that somebody went to Israel, what their purpose was, So for example, I think the most recent one was Elder Uchtdorf. I think he went this year. So I filled it out pretty good. But and it seems like there's all different reasons why they go there. Sometimes I can't tell. There's one time that Elder Bednar went there, and the story didn't really say anything other than he was just visiting the center in Jerusalem in general.
Well, he's kind of in charge of the Middle East right now, I think. So
right. Yeah, so maybe that's probably a big reason why. But how often do they go there? Would you say from your experience?
It's not all the time, but they'll come through 2 or 3 a year, I think, something like that. And you're in the Jerusalem Center. It's the only place in Jerusalem where we meet. So it means you're having members of the First Presidency or the 12 coming through, several times a year. Anyway, not every week, not every month, but sometimes they'll come through if they've been somewhere else. Like they used to come through if they'd been down in South Africa or something like that. You fly up to Jerusalem, then from Jerusalem home or something like that. So they'd stop off there. So yeah, it's amazing. And I think actually a better place to meet general authorities at one point was my home ward, because L. Tom Perry was related by marriage to some of my neighbors, and so occasionally you go to church and he'd be there. At one point he was drafted to teach the gospel doctrine class. He said, "Oh, come on, I was just going to relax today," but his sister got him to teach, and it was a fun lesson. Or I was just up in Cokeville, and his wife was from Cokeville, Elder Perry, and so he went up and was the grand marshal of their Pioneer Day parade one year. And so he just kept going up there. Came during the July month when the general authorities don't typically have assignments. Pretty soon he was bringing along members of the First Presidency, and I think most of the 12 and every member of the First Presidency, current First Presidency at one point or another, has participated in the Cokeville 24th of July parade. And you have to understand, Cokeville's a few hundred people. It's a pretty amazing place. So this year, though, they got me. Too bad.
I'd be happy with that.
Yeah. I was just thinking of that. You were talking about the Jerusalem Center. How do you feel about that? I don't know if it's a rumor. I remember reading something about how that could possibly be converted to a temple.
Yeah.
I know you were probably thinking I was going to ask that.
No,
I think Jared's come across that before too.
Yeah.
Yeah. How do you feel about that? I don't know.
I don't think so, because I think the temple has to be on the Temple Mount, and the Jerusalem Center looks right across at the Temple Mount. It's a perfect location. It is the best view, one of the best views in Jerusalem. I've gone over and accompanied some powerful, wealthy groups. They put me up in some of the really nicest hotels in Jerusalem. I went over with the governor on a trade mission once, governor of Utah. I've gone over with a couple of families that were wealthy and bought top dollar stuff. So, I stayed in some of those really posh hotels. They would die to have the view of Jerusalem that the Jerusalem Center has. I hope the students living in the dorm rooms in the Jerusalem Center realize nobody else has this view. You're looking out over the old city and the Dome of the Rock and all that sort of thing.
Well, isn't that where the Mount of Olives
is
right there, right?
They call it Mount Scopus, but it's basically the Mount of Olives.
Like the same ridge, right?
Yeah. And so you have this tremendous view of the old city. It cannot be beat anywhere else. There is one other hotel up on the Mount of Olives, and this is a case where I think there ought to be architectural malpractice. Maybe well, he's probably gone now, but I would have hanged him, I think, because he built the Seven Arches Hotel, it's called, or has been called, and it has all these windows looking north and south, but the old city is to the west.
Wow.
And on that side,
Wow.
it's a blank wall. And I think, what on earth would you do when you've got this spectacular site, spectacular view, and there are no windows facing that way? What is wrong with you? That's the only other place in Jerusalem that could rival the BYU Jerusalem Center. But our architect was brighter, and everything faces the old city, and everybody has a patio looking out over it. But my feeling is, okay, I don't think it will be the temple. Could it be temple housing? Oh yeah, it could definitely be that. I don't know.
I didn't want to steal Jared's thunder. He was probably going to ask this.
Oh, no, go ahead.
About the third temple. I don't know if you were going to go there or not, but what are your feelings about that? I know there's no stance. People think there's a stance on that. I think Bruce R. McConkie believed that it was going to be built by the priesthood.
Yeah.
There are others. I don't know if it was James E. Talmage, or I'm not sure if Hugh Nibley had a stance on that, or built by the Jews themselves. Is the third temple hyperbole? And what are your words on that?
Well, there is a group in Jerusalem that is putting together the vestments and the utensils, all the things they would need for a new temple in the style of Solomon's and Herod's, the second temple. They call themselves the Gush Emunim, the Block of the Faithful, or there's some other groups affiliated with them that are doing this. So they clearly think that the temple is going to be rebuilt, and they're going to rebuild it. Now, a lot of Jews don't want the temple back. They say, well, it was a historical moment in our religion, but we don't need animal sacrifices and things like that anymore. We're content with synagogues and reading about the temple and being inspired by it, but we don't want it back. And we don't have any priests. Although anybody named any variation of Cohen or Levi is probably arguably a descendant of the right lines. But they say we don't want it back, and so they would oppose it. Actually, they think that's a primitive stage of religion. We don't want it. So I don't know who's going to build it. I think if it's going to be a valid temple, it has to be built at some point by people with valid authority, and I don't think the Jews today have the authority to do that. So. Do you think most of them are like anti-Zionist Jews, or not necessarily? Even some of the most Orthodox Jews.
Well, let me say this really quick, because I know, because I spoke to a rabbi here in Wichita, but he's of the conservative movement. I know, talking to him, reading what I could, Reform, conservative, they'd probably be more of that frame of mind. But would you say that Orthodox and then ultra Orthodox, do you think that they would probably be more in line with expecting a temple?
Yes, they would. But a lot of others say, no, that was really important, but no more. It's not needed anymore. The rabbis succeeded the priests, and we're fine with that. But it's divided. I mean, you still have the people praying at the Western Wall, who are mostly Orthodox. And they still venerate that as a sacred place. All respect it, but they especially would love to have that temple back. And so you have deep security, Israeli and Palestinian, on the Temple Mount to keep weapons off the Temple Mount. They're afraid that somebody would come and try to blow up the Dome of the Rock, which probably sits where the temple once stood. And most people are terrified of that. They think that would be World War III. If that were to happen. It's the oldest still existing Islamic building, very holy place to them. And they don't want any damage to come to it. And most of the Israelis don't either. They're content to leave it there. Now, on the other hand, there was a famous Old Testament scholar by the name of David Noel Friedman, who was actually a Christian. But he believed that the third temple is already there, and it is the Dome of the Rock. That was his view. Of course, he didn't have the notion of a temple that we do, but he thought that served the role. Well, I've thought to myself, well, let's see. We've converted the Provo Tabernacle into a temple. We converted the Vernal Tabernacle into a temple. Would we ever do something like that to the Dome of the Rock? I personally don't want it destroyed. I love the building, but I hope that that's not part
It's
of the
beautiful.
Yeah, yeah,
There's something that makes me feel like it probably, of course, I can't speak for the Lord, but it probably wouldn't be in his style to do something like that. And maybe
no,
that area would remain a memorial of what was there before.
yeah,
But I guess, I mean, who knows? I guess we'll just have to wait and see.
yeah.
Um,
I'm usually of the opinion that when a prophecy is fulfilled, it will probably surprise me a little bit, because it probably won't be exactly the way I pictured it. But when it happens, I'll go, oh yeah, of course, that was what was meant.
It's not always accompanied by the sensationalism that we,
Right.
put with it.
Yeah, yeah. Yep.
I just put out a video today, actually, where I was covering a lot of, seems like there's a lot of archaeological activity going on in Israel. And I covered like 5 different things, including Shiloh, Bet Lehi, and like some people that think that could have been the house of Lehi. But one of them was what they believe is the discovery of Melchizedek's temple in the city of David.
Mhm.
And I'm sure maybe you've heard of it. Have you heard about?
A little bit, not much, but a little bit.
So it just there's a lot of really interesting features to that temple. I'll just say that. And I've always wondered if, well, I haven't always, but ever since I came across this story, I wondered if in some kind of way, even though it's like a ancient temple and is very, very tiny, if in some way that could possibly serve as like a site or a place where a future temple could be built.
Yeah.
It's on like the north side of the city of David,
Right.
not too far from the Temple Mount. But yeah, I think there's probably a lot of different possibilities, and all we can do is
Yeah.
just wait and see.
Yeah. Yeah. When it happens, we'll know. But until then, probably we have very funny notions of what it's going to be.
Yeah, certainly. I think those are all my questions, Troy. And if you wanted
I'm sorry if I sound so mechanical when I'm asking. One thing that when you guys were talking, I kept thinking of the Council of 50 that Joseph Smith organized. And because you brought up the millennium, Jared, which most Latter-day Saints should believe in a literal millennium. That and that fits perfectly with we know that many different faiths are going to be on the earth, and Islam is huge.
Yeah.
So definitely going to play a big part in that. And it's going to be interesting to see how that unfolds.
Well, that's it, Troy, since you brought it up, I have to ask him. I know that the Council of 50 was something that was an effort to try and prepare politically for the political kingdom of God. So much so that they created the flag of the kingdom of God that flies at Ensign Peak. And if I remember right, I think there was even like a constitution that was being worked on or drafted. Do you know, obviously, I'm assuming that that's been like shelved or something. Do you have any other insights as to, does that somehow remain active, or are there plans, or is it just completely put away as far as you know?
I don't know of any currently functioning Council of 50. I can tell you one thing, I'm definitely not on it. So if it is out there, it's being kept very quiet.
Yeah. So basically, like whatever those original documents were, it's more just kind of like they're archived, probably not going to be used unless, I guess, there's some kind of revelation saying to metaphorically resurrect them
Right.
for the millennium.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true.
Okay. So I wanted to just segue back. If I did that correctly, I'm not good at segueing very well. But just to let you guys know, I have a couple more questions. You did recommend this book a lot.
Yeah.
I finished it a few months ago. It's not that long of a read. No. But Richard Lloyd Anderson, he's written a few things. And was he a general authority?
No, he was a professor at BYU, but I think one of the great and maybe unheralded scholars in the history of the church. I think that's one of the great books. And he was interesting. His background is interesting. He went off to Harvard and got a law degree, and then decided he really didn't enjoy it that much, and so he ended up getting a PhD in ancient history from Berkeley, and then as well as the law degree from Harvard. And then he began being the greatest expert in the history of the church on the witnesses. And he was meticulous. He was the kind who, if he found out there was a new Martin Harris document, he would travel across the country because he had to see it personally and examine it. He didn't take anything on just trust that way. He knew what he was doing.
Yeah.
And one of the nicest people I've ever known. He passed away just a few years ago, but if you watch Witnesses, it's dedicated at the end to Richard Lloyd Anderson, a witness for the witnesses.
That's right. It is. That's right. So I mentioned this book, and before I get to the mega question that I forgot to ask you, just to let our folks know out there, it is the Interpreter Foundation.
Yes.
You are the executive director.
I'm the president now. That's the term we've decided on. So,
okay.
Yeah.
And we have movies, we have books, we have many different things. That you have a website, the Interpreter Foundation, and a YouTube channel for all of you people that like to watch things that are audio visual like me. You could go to the YouTube channel and watch. You could just spend hours just watching some stuff and you guys, like I said, I've referenced them a few times throughout the history of my channel. But if you ever really want a really good series to watch the scripture roundtables. They're so good. They're so good. I promise.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. We've got a lot of good volunteers, and there's a lot of effort that goes into this. And we have a journal. That's what we first started. The Interpreter, a journal of Latter-day Saint faith and scholarship, is what it's called now. And that has published a new article every Friday, at least one, sometimes two, occasionally even three, for what is it now? About 570 weeks running. And we started off just with the idea that we'd publish a couple of articles, make a splash, and then we'd see what we could do thereafter. But people have been turning in articles to us. We've never missed a week since August 2011.
Wow.
2012, I guess it was, 2012. And that amazes me, because it's not like we pay them anything. We don't pay them anything. They get a free copy of the journal, which is available for free online. So, they get nothing from us, but people still turn things in, and there's good stuff, really good stuff.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask you, we know that testimonies are built from the Holy Ghost, right? Because that's what it comes down to. The Spirit is who said the Spirit is the most important part of this work? Was that Joseph Smith, Brigham Young? I cannot remember.
It's a sentiment that a lot of people have expressed, I think.
Yeah. But not necessarily. Okay, so a testimony is built by the Holy Ghost, not necessarily by physical evidence. So why was it important or significant for these three men to see the plates, the other artifacts, and the angel?
Yeah. I think one thing that it does is it takes the matter out of the realm of the subjective. I mean, you could say, oh, Joseph Smith just, he really believed that he had these revelations, but they're all just in his mind and so on. When you have the witnesses testifying to having seen and hefted the plates, as the 8 witnesses do, that means this is not just Joseph Smith imagining he has plates, or Joseph Smith imagining he's having a vision. Something is going on here that's shared. Now, you can explain it away. You can say it was a conspiracy, although there's no evidence for that. And the bigger the conspiracy and the longer the time, the less likely it is the conspiracy will be kept secret. I mean, conspiracies always fall apart that way. Somebody spills the beans deliberately or inadvertently, but it means you've got to deal with this. And so I think Joseph Smith forces an issue. I wrote a paper years ago This is one of the sad stories of my life. It was a lengthy thing, almost book length, on comparing Joseph Smith and Muhammad. And one of the arguments that I was making was that Muhammad never has any material objects, and nobody else sees the visions that he sees. So you could explain him away as, you know, just lying or hallucinating or something. I don't necessarily do that, but you could. With Joseph Smith, you can't. That way is blocked to you because other people see the things he sees. Other people hold the plates. And on. Throughout his life, he almost never has a vision after the first vision where he's totally alone. Somebody else sees Moroni. Somebody else sees, you know, at one point or another, somebody else sees the vision of the 3 degrees of glory or Elijah appearing in the Kirtland temple. And so you've got to say, man, if I'm going to reject this, I have to believe that he's either lying or you've got a conspiracy or they're all crazy together, which is very hard. There's no such thing, as far as I know, of mass hallucinations. People don't, they don't hallucinate the same thing. If you put people in a room and fill it with gas so that they begin to hallucinate, they will all hallucinate, but they won't see the same things. It's based on what's in their brains, what's in their minds, their personal histories. And so to have this, you've got to say they're lying, it's a conspiracy, or I think, man, you've got to say, this is tough. I may have to accept this.
Well, even I noticed you bring that up a lot in your lectures and your Q&As and things like that. The other thing that you bring up that makes you kind of go, is the stone that Hiram Page had.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this was after the witnesses witnessed, the 3 witnesses witnessed the angel, the plates, and the sword of Laban, and the Urim and Thummim.
Yeah.
Right. And the Leahona. Right. Did I say all those right?
Yeah,
okay.
did.
This is after. Now, if they were trying to pull people's legs, why would they believe Hiram Page?
Yeah. Yeah.
If they would just be like, well, he's in on it with us too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
I think that's a really powerful and, kind of indirect argument. When he comes with the seer stone, Oliver Cowdery and David Whitman and Martin Harris could have said, yeah, we know that scam. We've just done it.
Right.
We're not going to believe you. But they really are tempted to believe it. The same thing when the Kinderhook plates are brought to Joseph. He gives
Another
them
one.
Look, I think. Now, if he's a scam artist, he's going to say, oh, man, you can't scam a scammer, right? He sees right through it right up front, but he
would have tried to help him get in on it with him,
Yeah.
And then we would have had things come out later that, Joseph said, yeah, these are pretty good. You should join my group and we'll scam everybody.
But he is open to the idea of that kind of revelation because he's received it. And so are the 3 witnesses. They are not surprised by seer stones. It doesn't surprise them at all.
Yeah.
Because they know it works. Now, whether this one is true or not, that's a different matter. But in principle, it could be. So
absolutely.
Everything, to my mind, argues that Joseph was sincere and that the witnesses were sincere. They really believed this stuff and they paid a price for it. When I think about Oliver Cowdery going on the first mission to the Lamanites, the winter of, 1830, 31? It's really early. And it's the worst winter on record. They traveled 1,200 miles on foot, the wind blowing in their faces, they're getting frostbite or fearing it. I think at a certain point, I would be saying to myself, this prank was entertaining for a while, but it's losing its charm. I'm out of here. But he really believes it. And so he proceeds into the face of the blizzard.
The other thing is I think we would eventually know who wrote the manuscript for the Book of Mormon. It would have come out.
Yeah.
Especially if, who was it? What was the Solomon Spaulding that there was
Ethan Smith.
Is that the Great War?
No,
that was Napoleon.
Ethan Smith's view of the Hebrews. But when you find them, you compare them, they're really not similar. It's not.
No, and somebody's family would have said, that was my relative, and I've got the proof right here.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much,
Well, thank you.
Dan. I think that you and Jared should do something sometime in the future, because he's got a lot of, he studies this stuff a lot.
I'm trying to. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much. You know what? And I would like to apologize because I didn't have your bio
Oh, that's fine.
ready, but most people know who you are, I think.
Well, you could do what one of my colleagues did once. I won a faculty award at BYU a long time ago, at least 15 years ago or more. And he got up and presented a biography of me that was false in every detail. Everything about it was not true. And he just made it up. It was actually,
oh my
funny,
goodness.
but, he said Dan and I grew up in the same town, you know, but he was on the rich side of the tracks and I was on the poor side of the tracks. We didn't even grow up in the same state. And then, you know, Dan was dyslexic growing up, but when he began to study Arabic, which runs from right to left, it cured his dyslexia. You know, and I had people for the next week or so coming up to me and saying, "Man, that was really interesting. I didn't know any of that stuff." And I said,
"Oh my
goodness!"
Didn't you? You told a joke at a Fair Latter-day Saint conference that was was it on dyslexia? What was it? If you you know what I'm talking about.
Is it the dyslexic atheist?
Yes.
Who stays awake at night wondering if there's a dog.
You got to think about it for a while. But once you do, it's funny. All right. Thank you so much.